third time I've said that. I'll probably say it 3 more times. See, in my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda. Terror, terrorism, terror, terrorist, terror organization, terrorist attacks, terrorism, terrorist network, terrorist attacks, terrorist group, terrorists, terrorist, terrorists, instruments of terror, terror network, terror cells, terrorists, terrorizing and terror and murder, terrorism, terrorists, terrorists, a tool of terror and torture.
President Obama today put the Assad regime on notice. Do not use chemical weapons or there will be direct consequences.
The Assad regime might be making preparations of some kind with its large stockpile of chemical weapons.
The use of chemical weapons is and would be totally unacceptable. And if you make the tragic mistake of using these weapons, there will be consequences and you will be held accountable.
But if he uses chemical weapons, he will have crossed a red line.
Weapons, 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 weapons of terror, terrible weapons, weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction, dangerous weapons to even more dangerous weapons, biological weapons, chemical agents, chemical weapons.
U.S. officials tell NBC News that the Syrian military has loaded the precursor chemicals for sarin nerve gas into aerial bombs that could be dropped from dozens of Syrian planes.
Now, this is a very dangerous situation, obviously, when there's at least the possibility of the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government, or the possibility that when that government falls, those weapons might not be secure, and there are terrorist groups, of course, some quite radical.
Weapons, ballistic missiles, chemical or biological weapons, chemical or biological attack, chemical and biological attacks, poisons, deadly gases, biological or chemical weapon, instruments of terror, biological or chemical or a nuclear weapon. Thanks for coming.
He is finished in Syria. There is no way he's going to emerge victorious, and the only options for him are to lose and lose his life in most probability, or to leave Syria. And with his latest problem with chemical weapons, this civil war has to be brought to an end.
That chemical weapons are the red line on Syria. Chemical weapons.
There will be consequences if the Assad regime makes a terrible mistake by using these chemical weapons on their own people.
Use chemical weapons, but if they do, if they use it against rebel groups, I think there'll be tremendous pressure on the part of everyone around the world to see the United States, Turkey, maybe a coalition of countries intervene in that very limited sense to try to stop the use of chemical weapons. The last thing in the world we would want to see is this nightmare scenario of a terrorist group with weapons of mass destruction. Another possibility that could possibly in the future lead to the introduction of American military forces. Chemical weapons changes everything in this calculation. It's a very decisive and very dangerous moment.
The Assad regime's contempt for its own people. The regime, empty promises and horrific violence, torturing opposition leaders, laying siege to cities, slaughtering thousands of unarmed civilians, including children, to Iran, brutal and unjust crackdown. The transition to democracy in Syria has begun, and it's time for Assad to get out of the way. As President Obama said this morning, no outside power can or should impose on this transition. It is up to the Syrian people to choose their own leaders in a democratic system based on the rule of law and dedicated to protecting the rights of all citizens, regardless of ethnicity, religion, sect, or gender. We understand the strong desire of the Syrian people that no foreign country should intervene in their struggle, and we respect their wishes. At the same time, we will do our part to support their aspirations for a Syria that is democratic, just, and inclusive.
Now let me say to all of you here, as all of you know, the weightiest decision any president ever has to make is to send our troops into harm's way. And force can never be the first answer, but sometimes it's the only answer. You are the best prepared, best equipped, best trained fighting force in the world. And should it prove necessary for me to exercise the option of force, your commanders will do everything they can to protect the safety of all the men and women under their command. And we seek to finish the job. Let there be no doubt, we are prepared to act. But Saddam Hussein could end this crisis tomorrow, give up his weapons of mass destruction. One way or the other, we are determined to see that he makes good on his own promise. Saddam Hussein's Iraq reminds us of what we learned in the 20th century and warns us of what we must know about the 21st. In this century, we learned through harsh experience that the only answer to aggression and illegal behavior is firmness, determination, and when necessary, action.
And we will stand up for their universal rights and dignity by pressuring the regime and Assad personally to get out of the way of this transition. As I've repeatedly said, it does take both words and actions to produce results. We have sanctioned the Commercial Bank of Syria for supporting the regime's illicit nuclear proliferation activities, ongoing threat to international peace and stability. The people of Syria deserve a government that respects their dignity, protects their rights, and lives up to their aspirations. Assad is standing in their way.
We got important breaking news to tell you about right now. NBC News is reporting that U.S. officials say their worst fears have been confirmed, that the Syrian military has loaded chemical weapons inside bombs. Bashar al-Assad's forces are now awaiting final order to use those loaded missiles against Syria's own people. This video, posted online, which we should say we can't independently verify, purports to show Syrian missiles that have been modified to carry chemical and biological weapons. Now, obviously, this is a sobering development, a situation that seems to be getting worse, by the day. I mean, if the U.S. military is going to act to prevent Assad from gassing his own people, it would seem, if they've loaded this stuff into weapons, the time to do it would be at hand.
And if this turns out to be true, even if not, the U.S. military, the CIA, in a full-blown effort to collect every piece of intelligence they can about what is going on with the chemical weapons and develop a targeting strategy if it were to come to that. They're targeting options for the president. Where are the chemical weapons in Syria? What would you do to attack them? What kind of U.S. bomber aircraft would you use? Do you know precisely where they are? How will you get that bomber aircraft past Syrian air defenses? And I think it's very safe to assume that neighboring countries, Israel, Turkey, Jordan, their intelligence services also working this problem around the clock. There is a lot, we know there is growing concern by the hour in the region, because if the Syrians use these kind of weapons against their own people, catastrophic.
NATO now prepares to deploy Patriot missile defenses to Turkey. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in Europe this week has warned the Assad regime in Syria against resorting to chemical weapons, chemical weapon threat. And
the focus is now on Syria, chemical weapons on its own people. I think events will change. Our government, again, is reported to be moving to recognize this more unified opposition. The fact that it exists is partially a credit to Secretary of State Clinton, but also to Egypt and other neighbors who have pushed for this to happen. Its headquarters is currently in Cairo.
It just doesn't get more serious than this.
With mixed sarin, landing in the middle of a city will immediately kill 18 to 20,000 people, and that's in the first seconds.
One round?
One round.
Weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. dangerous weapons to even more dangerous weapons. Biological weapons, chemical agents, chemical weapons.
There are new concerns this week that the Assad government is moving closer to the use of chemical weapons.
Assad may resort to chemical weapons. The Syrian government has a number of sites containing what's thought to be one of the largest chemical weapons stockpiles in the world, made up largely of sarin nerve gas.
To chemical weapons.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.